Welcome to my YouTube channel, everyone. I hope you'll subscribe. I am everything about coercive control and the impact on adult victims, and specifically or more honed in on the experiences of children. So many people suffer coercion and control in their family relationship dynamics, of course, in other places too. It is a prevalent problem where there's people who have character traits that are significantly problematic, and they exert power and control over others. It's always about power. And sometimes there's an added aspect. It's money and, of course, fame. There's a variety of ways. The overall goal of a coercive controller oftentimes is to retaliate. If they don't get their way, if things are not coming together as they expect, if the family decides to break up because one parent decides the family system is unsafe for them, then the abuser is going to retaliate. This is what abusers do all day long. We know this. Research proves this over and over again, that we see people with these character traits who we then end up in court with them. They have been financially abusing typically from the very beginning, the get-go. And the one thing they are always doing is trying to damage attachments within the family system. Think about a structure like a concrete slab. The abuser is constantly running around trying to create fractures in that concrete slab. And then the protective, safe parent is usually clueless that this is going on. They don't even realize that this abusive person who says they love them, maybe treats them poorly sometimes, this intermittent reinforcement is occurring, that this abuser actually perhaps is trying to harm people in the family system, right? That's a place victims have a hard time going to, is this idea that someone actually would intentionally try to harm loved ones, family members. And here's the deal. It's because abusers really don't know how to love. They only know how to control. And so if they cannot control things, they're going to move in a way, they move beyond psychological tactics and they move into other realms of abuse simply because that's how they can retain control. So what do we know about what's happening with our children in these family systems? I always say abusers start day one. So if you are living with someone and you're like, yeah, he doesn't seem that bad, or I'm not sure he's abusive to the kids. I know he's abusive to me, or she's abusive to me. Know full well that that person is in some way attempting to exert power and control over everyone in the family system. They love to create this idea that one sibling is favored over the other. They love to create this idea that the protective, safe parent is in some way diminished. Now, it can come across as love and loving. It doesn't have to be, that person's awful. It can be, oh, they're tired a lot, huh, lately? Or, oh, I'm sorry that mom wasn't available to you. Or mom certainly seems to be super sensitive and unhinged or crazy. Again, it can be more overt, crazy, unhinged, and it can just be, oh, your mom, she's a little sensitive. And so knowing that this is how abusers operate is super important, right? I always say we have to use the 3 Ps. Predict this is happening. Just know it's happening so that you can better prepare yourself for what this is going to look like in your family system so that you can better protect yourself and your children. So this is the deal. A lot of people don't realize all of this stuff is going on in the family system and you can't see it. You're not sure, you want to believe the abuser's a good person. So in some ways you might actually overlook it, because that feels easier, right? And so what happens is when the abuser has ultimately weaponized the children in a way that they begin to think you're unsafe, that you are crazy, that you took all the family's money, when the children begin to actually, they don't always believe it, but when they begin to actually take that in and project it out to you, that's the abuser working through them, right? So think about, I love octopuses, so I don't want to talk mainly about them, but in general, we know octopuses have lots of feelings from a movie that was recently released. But let's just say the tentacles, right, of this abuser. right? And so the abuser is going to come in and grab what they can and take away what they can. And slowly over time, they've created this eroding away of the child's secure attachment to the malicious fracturing of attachment. And when they do this, they actually create instability in the child. And when they do that, the child is more readily coerced and controlled. So if you do have a child coming home who's saying horrible things to you, know that that child has suffered really extensive abuse, because it's reached a point now where they have no choice but to align with the oppressor and to actually like identify with that oppressor and oftentimes act out behaviors with the oppressor, right? So that is not a bad child. That is not a disrespectful child. That is not a, how could this child behave this way? That is your child, that beautiful baby that you love so much. That is your child broken by an abusive parent. Broken down, worn down, just like a prisoner of war. I cannot say it enough. They are just like prisoners of war. And you're like, well, great, but what am I supposed to do? They're calling me horrible names. They're doing these horrible things. They don't want to come and visit me. Okay, this is really challenging. But a lot of people are like, well, if we just go to therapy, we'll get better. Repair therapy, right? Or I want them to go to therapy, right? Well, here's the problem is that people who are clinically trained, myself included, we go to school to learn to validate people, to hear their perspective. And sometimes, sadly, sometimes some therapists don't actually want to really untangle the web. They just assume there's no web. They assume this child feels this way because something happened with the relationship between the safe, quote unquote, the therapist may not know that, the safe protective parent and this child. All they know is a child's expressing anger and frustration at you and putting you down. And they're like, I got to validate this kid. I need to make sure this kid knows they're heard. And what they haven't done is they haven't looked at the parental subsystem in this family system, right? What's the dynamics between the father, we'll assume, and the mother? And again, I'm talking in binary terms, but you understand what I'm saying. It can happen across all kinds of dynamics, right? What is really occurring? And so if we unpack that, it's not hard to see who has had more power and control in the relationship, that there's been an unequal dynamic. But sadly, that gets missed. And how do you, by the way, even if you see it, if you're a therapist and you see it and you know it, and by the way, I have a Coercive control professionals training that I'm trying to train therapists to understand this, and attorneys and advocates and coaches, because we need to really understand what this looks like. And so let's just say you see it, you know what's going on. Your therapist sees it, they know what's going on. Does coercing a child to actually try to escape the prison guard, the prison, does coercing them, well, if you just stood up to your father, or you do realize your father's this person or whatever, they have to get back in the car oftentimes with the more powerful parent. That more powerful parent's waiting in the waiting room. That is a child who doesn't know what to do, and they can't speak their truth. That's been gone. And so this is why I'm going to mention I created the protective parenting program, because the earlier we can intervene and really create and fortify that attachment with them, the less likely the abuser is going to be able to lure them away. And they lure them all the time during tweens and teens. I have a YouTube on that and also a podcast on that. They lure them all the time about, regarding tweens and teens. It's easy. We just give them what they want. They go from authoritarian parenting to permissive parenting. They're always authoritarian, by the way, I should say. But there's always this power, right? They have that intense power. But the reality is that they become permissive in their power, right? Nothing's ever unconditional with these abusers. It's always conditional. You can have the car if you do what I tell you to do. You can use your phone as long as you want. Go play video games all night long. Just keep doing what I require you to do. And I require you to turn against that safe, protective parent. So again, this is unconventional, or people don't like when I say this, but the reality is sometimes letting go with love, letting go with love. Listen, sweetheart, I understand you don't want to come visit me. I get it. Now, your dad's a bad person. Your dad did this to you. I get it. I know exactly what's going on here. I know. And it's okay. I'm right here waiting for you. No shame. How dare you? After everything I've done for you, how could you turn against me? No, 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 no. That is how we fortify what the abuser wants in our child. The abuser wants our child to feel shame. They, of course, feel fear all of the time, but they want them to feel shame so that if they feel shame, then they're going to be more easily controlled. And so we live in a world where the systems don't recognize this. I need you to recognize this. I need you to know. I need you to know that, some moms pay their children to go to therapy, right? Which makes a lot of sense if the kids actually know what's going on. But what if they walk in the door with the therapist and they're forced to go because this protective parent is just can't believe this is happening? Somebody's got to help my child see it. And then they go to therapy and they're validated for thinking that their mother's crazy or their father's crazy. Instead of, let's talk about where these feelings come from. Let's talk about why this is so upsetting for you. Let's talk about some of the things maybe mom or dad has done to make you think this. Do you ever remember times where your mom was there for you or where your dad was there for you? And now this gets really tricky because a child is going to remember those good, positive memories. The question becomes, who has been there for the child unconditionally, all of the time, not objectified? If you're a therapist listening to this, please know we have to teach the children, we have to teach them the difference between what's an objectified relationship and what's an unconditional relationship. Where have they always felt they could authentically be themselves? Where have they not had to regulate their behaviors, walk on eggshells? Again, ask yourself as a therapist, as an outsider listening, no, as a protective, safe parent, this is what I'm trying to teach, right? Is I'm trying to educate that it's not hard to discern who the abuser is. Victims don't always behave well, by the way, right? We know that, right? They're not perfect parents. But overall, who's been the person who's exerted power and control? Who's been the person who has in some way attempted to diminish and create space in that family system where people do have to regulate their behavior? It's not hard to discern if you start to really unpack and untangle all of the web of the abuser, right? And so, as I said, the abuser has these tentacles. They come in and they start to tighten their grip. And if you send your child to therapy and the abuser has time with your child, they're going to tighten their grip unless that relationship was built a long time ago and the abuser doesn't have the power over that therapist and the power over the child in the same way. So super important that we are educating our children on understanding what this can look like. Now, I really decided to create this YouTube to actually talk about how to prevent our children from becoming more like that abusive parent, because sometimes, man, they are acting in a way that is very triggering and overwhelming, right? I want to validate that for you. Yeah, they are. They are. And so does that mean they're a narcissist? Does that mean they're a coercive controller? Well, what it means is they're feeling very out of control and they have to align with, again, their oppressor, the prison guard. So what do we need to do? And this is again leading back to, do they need to be forced to repair with us? Because when they're forced to repair with us, that's when they actually are getting more exertion, tightening of the grip, tentacles, whatever you want to call it. That's when they're experiencing more of that because the abuser now has to level up. The abuser has to create more experiences where they know that that abuser is in charge. Oh, you're going to therapy? Oh, yeah. Make sure you tell that therapist how crazy your mother is. Oh, you're going to therapy? Oh, therapy's for sissies. Or, oh, that therapist doesn't know what the heck she's talking about. Don't trust her. I think she talks to your school people too. I think that your mother signed a release of information. So now everybody at school is going to know that your mother thinks you're a problem, right? Everybody at school is going to know your grades. Everybody at school is going to know whatever it is. So, like, what am I doing right here as an abuser? I'm building up shame. Woo-hoo-hoo. I'm pushing in that shame agenda on you. Of course, it's fear again, but it's shame if I keep on pushing that on you, right? And so, how are abusers built? Shame. They were never loved unconditionally. They couldn't authentically be themselves. They were devalued. Now, of course, did they have predispositions to these traits? Biologically, were there some, genetic markers for this kind of stuff? Yeah, we know that that occurs, right? And the hope is, right, that your child doesn't have this predisposition and that with your love and attention and understanding of what they're experiencing, that we take those traits, those markers are not as powerful. They're less powerful. That's our hope, right? And so, really letting go sometimes of that rope, that's really challenging. I'm not suggesting that's easy. Of course, um, creating space for when they're with us where we are not correcting all the time, we are connecting as much as possible. Creating positive memories, reminding them of positive memories, giving them the tools to see the positive memories in their life, because those are totally like those become down, they go down a black hole. The abuser doesn't allow them to remember those positive memories. Every single positive memory there's a false narrative around it. So I know it's really challenging. I want to tell you that my heart understands the pain. I don't call this alienation because for me, alienation, of course, has been co-opted by abusive people, but also it's a fracturing of attachment, of the secure attachment that every child deserves. And so anything you can do. So maybe the relationship dynamic with your child is fractured in some way. Again, it can always be reignited. And if you're listening and you have younger children and it hasn't happened yet, please fortify that attachment as soon as possible. Work every day diligently, right? I call it the CIA. Be creative, be intentional about it, and be attuned to your child. Know that you can really look at them and you know your children better than anyone. What is going to work in this moment that's going to be helpful, right? And they have to think it's coming from an authentic place, even though I suggest always in my protective parenting program that you plan this out. Like, what does your week look like with your child? How can you do this, right? If you're not seeing your children, but you're able to connect with them in some way, how can you really create the space where they see that you are not ticked off at them, that you totally understand why they're behaving this way? You totally get it. You've been there and you have been there. You have been there. You have experienced all of this. And it was really hard for you to escape, wasn't it? And if it was hard for you to escape, then of course it's hard for our children to escape, right? They don't know any better. So if we can start when they're younger and create opportunities for agency, but also surround them, and it's not with a lot of people, but with a few people in their world that they can lean on. So that if the abuser is able to really get in there and work away at that attachment, that secure attachment with you, that there's an aunt or an uncle or a good friend that you can rely on to pull your child back to them. It may not be with you. That'll come later. What matters most is that that relationship with someone else never gets taken away from your child, because abusers are going to do whatever they can to take away those other relationships. We see this all the time. So I think overall, what you need to know is that therapy can be dicey unless you have someone who totally gets it, right? And your child does not, like, going to therapy isn't more problematic for your child, doesn't coerce them more to say bad things about you. Remember, that's building shame. We don't want that. The less that they are forced to do those kinds of behaviors, the better. And that means sometimes letting go of the rope. And then knowing that if they don't see us as this, it's this push pull and we're pulling them apart, right? That we actually can support them when they're ready to come back, that we'll be ready, that we understand. Just waiting. The most painful thing in the world. I know. But it creates opportunities for their growth in some ways because the coercion and control is not being exerted. As soon as we let go a little bit, the abuser doesn't have to exert as much power and control over them. I hope that's helpful, everyone. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please remember my podcast, Perfect Prey. If you're interested in the protective parenting program, I would love for you to join me. We launch again in September live, but also it's offered self-study. Have a wonderful day. Bye.